In this video, we're going to look at how to learn all the notes on the guitar fretboard. If you're a beginner and you don't know where the notes like A or B or any other notes are, then hopefully you'll have a better understanding after watching this video. This picture here represents the guitar fretboard. These are the strings E, A, D, G, B, and E, or you might know them as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. For the sake of this video, it's going to be better to learn them as E, A, D, G, B, and E, with the thick E string at the bottom of the diagram and the thin E string at the top. The thick E string is represented by an uppercase E, and the thin E string is represented by a lowercase e, kind of like what you might have seen on guitar tablature. I've colour coordinated them as well to match the other notes on the guitar neck that we'll see later on in the video. I'll also add the fretboard markers and the numbers at the bottom of the diagram, so that 0 represents the open strings and the numbers 1 to 12 represent the frets. I'll put all of the musical notes above as well. For now, let's just look at the natural notes and the sharp notes. For those that don't know, a sharp note basically means a note that's one semitone higher, or in guitar language, that's one fret higher. For example, if this note here is F on fret 1 of the E string, 1 fret higher is F sharp. So if someone is said to be singing too sharp, it basically means they're singing too high. You might have heard that before. There are flats as well, which are basically the opposite. A flat is a word used to describe a note that's one semitone or 1 fret lower, but I'll explain them in a bit more detail later on in the video. Let's just concentrate on the natural and the sharp notes for now. The natural music notes that I'll highlight in red are basically just notes that aren't sharp or flat. They're the same as the alphabet from the letter A, but they repeat after the G note. So we have A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, and then it starts again. Every note has a sharp version apart from B and E, and you can see this if you look at the notes above. The next note after B is C, and the next note after E is F. On a piano, B and C would be here, and E and F would be here, and as you can see, there is no black key in between them, like there are with the other notes. That's because the black keys are the sharps and flats. You can pause the video if you'd like to keep looking at the piano diagram, because I'm going to get rid of it in a second. The strings on the guitar are named after the notes we tune them to in standard tuning. Therefore, the open E string is also an E note. So don't just think of these as the string names. They're also notes that we can play that aren't on the fretboard. They're just another position of notes that are available. So if the open E string is an E note and E doesn't have a sharp version like I said before, the next note would be fret 1, and that would be the next letter in the alphabet, which is F. F does have a sharp version. So the next note would be F sharp. After that, the next note would be the next letter in the alphabet after F, which is G. So fret 3 is a G note. It's also the first note, or the root note, in an open G chord. Guitarists are a little bit strange because most musicians would learn where the notes are on their instrument before they know how to play chords and songs. Guitarists tend to learn how to play chords and songs way before they even know where the notes are or what they're called. You can actually learn a lot of the notes on the fretboard from identifying the root note of the chord that you're playing. For example, a C chord starts with a C note, a B chord starts with a B note, and every chord should generally start with the note that the chord is named after. 99% of the chords are going to be like this, but occasionally you'll get chords like this. This is a version of F, but the lowest note in the chord is actually a C note. Even though this chord could be used to replace a normal F chord in a song, technically it should be called F/C to signify that it's an F chord, but C is the lowest note in the chord. You might have seen chords like this before, chords like D/F sharp or C/B. Anyway, after G, we have G sharp on fret 4, and then we start again at A on fret 5. I'll do the rest quickly. So after that is A sharp, and then B. B doesn't have a sharp, so the next note after that is C, and then C sharp, and then D, and then D sharp, and then we end up back at E on fret 12. You can do this on each string. Basically, just remember that it's the alphabet from A to G, and every note has a sharp version apart from B and E. Each string is named after the note it's tuned to in standard tuning, like I said before. So this open A string is an A note. Fret 1 will be A sharp, 1 fret higher than that will be B. B doesn't have a sharp, so the next note is C, and so on. If you want to try and figure out the notes on some of the other strings by yourself, pause the video and then you can check if you get them right in a second. You could even just try and figure out where a specific note is to practice, so try and find an F sharp on the B string, for example. Don't worry if it seems difficult at first. It's very common for people to forget the alphabet when learning the notes on the neck for the first time. So let me just fill in the rest of the notes on the other strings and then we can look at some of the patterns on the fretboard. Here's all the notes on the fretboard in standard tuning. Whatever note we play on the thick E string, we can find another version of that note on the thin E string as well. So already, if you can figure out the notes on one E string by using the musical notes I explained before, you can quickly learn the same notes on the same fret on the other E string. A lot of these notes will share the same name, but they might be one octave higher or lower, or even multiple octaves higher and lower than the other note with the same name. For those that don't know, one octave is just the distance between a note, like this E on the open E string, and then the next note that shares the same name, so like this E note on fret 12. These notes do sound very similar, although one is higher than the other. To get a little bit scientific, the open E note is lower and it vibrates at around 82 times per second. And the E note on fret 12 is an octave higher and vibrates twice that speed, so around 164 times a second. The next E note an octave higher would vibrate twice as fast as that. Each note has different versions at different octaves all over the guitar neck. The notes on the thin E string will be 2 octaves higher than the notes on the thick E string, but they'd still share the same name. So you can see this black line here that joins up an A note on fret 5 of the thick E string and an A note on fret 5 of the thin E string. Whatever note you can find on the thick E string, you can also find on the D string 2 frets higher. So there's an A note on fret 5 of the E string, and there's also an A note on fret 7 of the D string. This exact same pattern also works on the A string. You can find the same note on the G string 2 frets higher. So this open A string is an A note, and this is also an A note on fret 2 of the G string. There's a similar pattern on the D string, but it's not exactly the same distance. If you play a note on the D string, for example this A note on fret 7, and then you go onto the B string 3 frets higher this time, you can find the same note 1 octave higher. The shape is similar, but the distance between the frets is different because of how we tune the guitar, which I'll explain later on in the video. You can use the same shape on the G and the E string to do the same thing. For example, fret 2 on the G string is an A note, and so is fret 5 on the E string. Here's some of the patterns together. So far we've mainly looked at A notes, but the same patterns will apply to other notes as well. You can memorize one pattern like this one that I didn't look at before. So this pattern shows that whatever note you play on the D string, you can find the same note 2 frets lower on the E string. And you can move this pattern anywhere like this. So we can see that there's a C note on fret 10 of the D string and 1 on fret 8 of the E string. Or there's 2 B notes here, or 2 A sharps here. All the patterns that I've shown you can be moved along the fretboard. A lot of you might know this already if you've tried to tune the guitar by ear, but the notes on the E string are the same as the notes 5 frets lower on the A string. For example, this is A, and this is also A. The same thing applies to most of the other strings. Whatever note you play on the A string, you can find the same note on the D string 5 frets lower. The same thing applies with the D string and the G string. The next set of strings, the G and the B, is a little bit different. If you're playing a note on the G string, you can find the same note 4 frets lower on the B string. This is just due to how the guitar is tuned. When you get to the B string, the pattern is back to normal, with all the notes on the B string matching the notes 5 frets lower on the E string. And these patterns can be moved up and down the fretboard as well. After fret 12, all the notes repeat. So if you learn all the names of the notes on fret 3, where the first fretboard marker is, the notes 12 frets higher on fret 15 are going to be exactly the same. And fret 15 will also have a fretboard marker. We could just change the numbers around to demonstrate this. So let's imagine these notes are now the notes from 12 to 24, if your guitar goes that high. They're the same. The dots are the same, the patterns are the same, it's just that the notes from 12 to 24 are an octave higher than the notes from 0 to 12. So, let's get rid of these notes and I'll explain the flats. The flats are the opposite of the sharp notes. They'll be 1 fret lower than a note of the same name. Meaning, if this is G, 1 fret lower is G flat. So F sharp and G flat are the same note. They're called enharmonic equivalents, which just means the same musical sound with a different name. You can see this demonstrated on the notes above. A sharp is the same as B flat, C sharp is the same as D flat, D sharp is the same as E flat, and so on. So just like when I said before, E doesn't have a sharp because the next note is F, and B doesn't have a sharp because the next note would be C. When it comes to flats, C doesn't have a flat because the note 1 fret below is B, and F doesn't have a flat because the note 1 fret below is E. The natural notes will stay the same. Technically though, if I'm being really truthful, you do sometimes get notes like E sharp, which is just the same note as F. It's an enharmonic equivalent like I mentioned before, but I wouldn't worry about it for now. You'll probably never need to worry about that unless you're reading music. Try and just learn the natural notes and then either the sharps or the flats for now. If you want to practice, you could go to a random note generator website. I'll put a link right at the top of the description. And then pick a string, generate some random notes, and see if you can find them on that string. It will take time to learn them, and you'll have to check that you're right by either using this video or another fretboard diagram. But just try and pay attention to the notes in the chords and the scales that you play. Like I said earlier on in this video, the majority of the chords that you play will start with the note that they're named after. An A chord will start with an A note. A B minor 7 will start with a B. And the same applies to scales. E minor pentatonic will start with an E note, for example. A huge benefit of knowing where all the notes on the neck are is that if you learn a scale shape or a chord and you know it starts with a specific note, you can learn a version of that chord or scale in every key just by moving it so that it starts with a different note. I'll use this chord as an example. These notes on the fretboard are the notes of a D major 7 chord. It starts with a D note on fret 5 of the A string. If I move it 1 fret higher so that it starts with D sharp on fret 6 of the A string, we get D sharp major 7. If I move it up again so that it starts with an E note on fret 7 of the A string, we get E major 7. It's a major 7 chord shape, and whatever note the chord starts with determines the name of the chord. There's a lot more chord shapes and positions on the neck that you could try this, and I'll try and do a video about this because I'd like to talk about it in a bit more detail. Anyway, for now, that's the end of the lesson. If you found this video useful, please like and subscribe.